Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon. This is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father-son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of leadership, business, sport, and faith. Today marks episode 9. For the first 6 episodes, what we did is a series on your 6 secrets of transformation, Dad. So if you like, those were sort of more being principles. Then we went into 2 episodes of a more open format, taking some of your questions to guide our episode. And now we are going to go more into the doing. This next 8 episodes, we're going to be doing a series on the big, fast results, 8 steps of transformation, your methodology in your consulting firm. Dad, can you tell us about step 1? Step 1 is set the strategic direction. What do we mean by that?
What we mean by that is it's a workshop that we want to conduct where we bring the entire leadership of the organization into a room to make sure that they have leadership commitment and leadership alignment on 2 things. 1 is the true north. 2 are the key priorities. And that is very, very important. In my mind, anything that you do on transformation cannot even begin, and it will not succeed if you don't have leadership commitment and alignment. This is absolutely critical. And so therefore, this thing, we call it step 1 because it's a starting point. Without that, nothing will happen. Now, if I return back to the earlier episodes we had, we talked about the game, the impossible, and we talk about true north. In this workshop that we're talking about, we are now getting the whole leadership, the board of a company, as well as the management team. If it's a country, the prime minister, it will have to be also all the ministers and the top civil servants. They're all gathered together in a room so that they discuss what is the true north that they're really going to go for. At the same time, they will then say, can we push it until it becomes the game of the impossible, to the point that the true north is unattainable on the basis of the current way of doing it. And so they are forced then to look for a new way how to do it. So once they're forced into a new way how to do it, in the workshop, we then get them to decide what are the key priorities that they must focus on to achieve the true north. That's really the objective of this workshop.
And, just to be clear, it sounds like the objective of this also is obviously you want to get, people to align on the true north. But am I right in assuming that the importance here or the caveat here is that it must start with the leadership first, the most senior people?
Absolutely. I think if you don't get the leadership involved, whatever is happening down the line in the organization is not going to see the light at the end of the day, simply because there are no commitment, there are no resources given to it. So many of the good ideas will simply die. So I believe the first step in the big fast result methodology is to get leadership commitment and alignment. You may have a prime minister wanting to do it. If the leadership of the entire cabinet is not with him, he will also fail. In an organization, if you have the CEO wanting to chase and do a particular task, and he is alone in doing it, he doesn't have his entire management team with him. At the same time, the board is not with him. He's also doomed to fail. So therefore, this leadership and strategic workshop is so critical in moving forward. To me, you can't even do step 2 until you have ticked clearly step 1, and this is key.
Yep. Yeah, so it's important to get leadership in because ultimately, if your leadership is bought in, they can ensure that things are actually driven down the line. Now, the question to that is, in the context of, let's say, in your case, in PEMANDU Associates, in your consulting firm, you do a lot of government transformation work. So in this context, that would mean that if you're working with a government, let's say, of a country, then you would obviously want your prime minister or president in the room, all of the key ministers to be part of that strategic workshop. Now, the question is, how then do you get the time? Because I'm assuming this is not a 1-hour type of deal. It's quite a concerted effort. So how do you get the time of these very busy individuals, whether it's a key minister or whether it's a CEO of a company?
Yeah. It is very important to have a conversation with the CEO. In my case, when I went into the government of Malaysia, I had a one-to-one discussion with the Prime Minister, and I told him it's critical that we have this workshop because whatever you want to do, you need the whole cabinet and the whole top leadership in the civil service to come along with you. He's a smart guy. He understood it. Quite clearly, he understood it. And the same thing we had when we were doing consultancy for Tanzania, the country of Tanzania. I had a good discussion with President Kikwete. And I told him, Mr. President, you cannot go and do all these things alone by yourself. You require the entire cabinet and the whole of top civil servants to come along with you. He also agreed with it. But that conversation is key. You have to convince him. Alone, he will not be able to do it. But together with his entire leadership team, if they're with him, then he has a much better chance at doing it. In the case of Tanzania, President Kikwete, he said, Idris, I really want to have this cabinet workshop. Even though it's going to be held in Dodoma. Dodoma is so far away from Dar es Salaam. Everybody is living in the capital city in Dar es Salaam. And Dodoma is about 7 hours drive. And he wanted the whole cabinet to be driving all the way to Dodoma for the cabinet workshop. And I looked at him, are you sure they will come? I said, don't worry, Idris, they will come because I'm totally committed to this idea. So getting the president in this case and getting the prime minister in our case in Malaysia really on board with the idea is critical. And I told him that we don't just go there and run the workshop, but we have to spend a lot of time to prepare for the workshop. Because if you don't prepare for the workshop is going to be chaos. And so a lot of preparatory work, to your point, you have to put a lot of work. It's not a small thing. Although the workshop is only 1 day, but the preparation can take 1 or 2 weeks prior to that.
You mentioned chaos. What are some examples of a chaotic strategic alignment workshop?
I have seen a workshop where we were not leading it, and I'm an observer in a workshop, and I will not mention which organization it was in my early years in my life, my corporate life. It was chaos because they did not agree the priorities. And there were many, many divisions, and there were many priorities each of them wanted to do, but getting them to agree the priorities, there was conflict and there was chaos. And the CEO was completely unable to deal with the chaos. It was so hard. At the end of the day, after we did that, the CEO actually fired one of the vice president. The very next evening, he fired him. He told him, don't turn up for work because it was so chaotic. It was so combative, and it was done in an open forum. And so I think it was a point of no return. It has never happened in that organization before, where the chairman, in this case, and the managing director, fired one of those guys that night alone. So that's an example of a highly chaotic and highly combative workshop that actually didn't get to the outcome when they needed.
Talk us through some of then the preparation that goes into ensuring that these sorts of chaotic incidents are mitigated.
Yeah. The first thing that's needed in preparing for it is the designers of the workshop need to produce a simulation model. Let's take an example of a company now, and I'll return back to an example of a country. In a company, you need to have a profit and loss statement for the current position, and let's say you are making 200 million or 400 million net profit after tax. And let's now suppose you then say in the simulation, let's do a true north game of the impossible. Say in 3 years or 3 or 4 years that you want to triple, 3x the net profit after tax from 400 million to, let's say, 1.2 billion. That is actually immediately deemed to be impossible to achieve because the organization that I'm talking about weren't able to do it. So you then have to then put in the simulation model some assumptions, and then you run the model. So let's suppose you cut costs. If you say you're going to cut costs by 30%, will it achieve you the 1.2 billion net profit after tax? The answer is definitely not. So you know you can improve the cost structure by cutting it, but it's not going to make a significant improvement. So at the end of it all, it is very clear revenue will have to be the main lever. So, but if it's revenue, you then have to say, will the current array of products and services that we're putting out there, will it be able to do that? If you say the answer is no, it's unlikely to be, then the question is, what kind of new products are going to put in and sell? So then if you say, okay, if I put in 5 more new product lines, and you make assumptions about how much sale each of those product lines are going to make over a 4-year period, then I think it becomes clear to them. That's how you come with your priorities. So that is the key things that you need to prepare. So to summarize, create a simulation model so that you will then anchored on the P&L. Remember I said before the true north. The true north here is that you're defining it to be net profit after tax, 1.2 billion in 4 years, as opposed to currently only 4 million net profit after tax. And that's a massive shift. So then you would already, using the model, understand some of the key levers. There are people that will tell you, let's cut costs. But you can't cut costs when you're already just like that. A small company cannot achieve that kind of number, so it is impossible. So you have to look for different revenue stream that is going to do it. So those are some. Let's take an example of a country. In Malaysia, this is the real example. We conducted in 2009 a public perception survey. And in this public perception survey that Barisan Nasional put out to the public, we asked one question to the public. What are the areas you are very unhappy about in this country, the way the government is running it? And they were very clear. The priorities, the areas where they were not happy about corruption, they were not happy about crime, they were not happy about rural infrastructure, they were not happy about urban public transport, and they were not happy about cost of living and education. Those were the areas that they put out there. Now, the question here is that if the government says is a government for the people, he has to listen to these. And that was how the NKRA was born during the workshop, because we did the preparatory work by asking the public what were the pain points. And they were most unhappy about public transport, for example. And people were so unhappy about. That's why today, you see, Leon, we have the MRT. The MRT was born out from that preparatory work where we went out there and asked the public. They were most unhappy about public transport. In particular, the trains were so crowded, and that's an example. So all those areas I described, corruption, crime, rural infrastructure, urban public transport, low-income household, and education. Those were the areas that they were really unhappy about. They were the basis in which the government said these were the priorities.
Talk me through what the agenda looks like in a workshop.
The agenda looks like this. In the morning, we normally get people to come relatively early. Better to come at 8 o'clock. So 8 o'clock, for nearly an hour, you want the CEO or the president to talk about his or her vision for the true north that he wants to. That's prepared before. He would have had a slide deck that put that clearly. And he said, he wants to pursue the game, the impossible. His storyline is, this is where we are today, this is where we want to be, the promised land, the true north. And there's a huge gap. And he says, I know many of you are saying it cannot be done, and I agree with you, it cannot be done based on the current way of doing it. And therefore, we have to look for a different way how to do it. But we cannot do it by running wild. We have to do it and agree the priorities. Then he says, I believe, I have analyzed this and I have discussed with my own team, I believe these are the 6 areas of priorities. And he has to come out here. Remember, I told you on the situational leadership. This is when the Prime Minister, in this case, lay down the land. He says, this is my vision of the true north. This is how I wanted to go it. These are the 6 priorities. But I'm prepared to discuss with you. And if you have any other things that are better than this, I'm prepared to have an open forum and we can discuss and amend them. And that's why I'm asking you to come here. So that's in 1 hour. After he finished then 1 hour, then the person, his right-hand man in that organization will have another hour to take them through the simulation model. The why the simulation model is so important is because it grounds everything that the Prime Minister is talking about to some realities, facts and figures. So it cannot just be something in the air. So people will then believe it. So normally when the Prime Minister or the CEO lays down the true north and defines the key priorities, they like it, but they are not sure whether it's actually doable. But when you run the model, then they will begin to believe that, oh, actually it's not totally impossible. He's not talking wild. It's grounded with facts, and if you did so, and it works. So when that is done, then the next thing that you will then do is that it is very important to bring hope and confidence. This is when you invite an external person from outside the organization to talk about best practice. So you bring someone from outside and say, we have done it, this is what we have done there, this is how it has done. So you will notice then, this person that talks about the journey that they have taken in their organization, a very similar journey, and they've achieved the results, it gives the confidence to the team that what their CEO or their Prime Minister is talking about is not pie in the sky. It's something completely doable. Other people have done it. So when those 3 sets of presentations are then done, you then have a break, and that is for lunch. You tell them during lunch, I want you guys to think about it, really ponder on what was shared out there, because we're going to go into syndicate groups. So when they come back from lunch, you break them into various syndicate groups, and you ask them to talk about the various key priorities. So maybe one group talks about this, another group talks about that priority, another group. So they all go away in their syndicate groups, and then they use this and say, if we did this, what is our view, how it connects to the true north? What is the impact? Try and put some numbers onto it. What do you think we can achieve in terms of doing it? And we also tell them, if you think there are better priorities than the one laid by the President or the Prime Minister or the CEO, put it forward as well. So they come out from the syndicate group, then they make presentations. Each of them make the presentations there. Then after the presentations, then there are plenary discussion. That's when the debate will begin to come there. You need a very good facilitator for this workshop, because facilitation is very important in the workshop, so that you will make sure that there's enough airtime that's given between individuals, not 1 or 2 person dominate the conversation.
What's the criteria for a good facilitator?
A good facilitator is a guy or a lady that is able to pick the gems in what people are saying, and that's one. Pick the key points very quickly. At the same time, someone that is prepared to look at who is keeping quiet and drawing them into the crowd. And this is a very good facilitator, and being able to summarize the thing that people are saying and bring them into the others who are quiet into the crowd. And also, and putting difficult questions. Sometimes it is important to do it. Normally, most people want to settle for realistic targets. A good facilitator will, in this particular case, he will really put them challenging, provocative questions that will really get them to think outside the box. And that's a good facilitator.
On that, some people might say, in the context of, having very high level people in the room, that people might assume then that your facilitator would be either someone like yourself, or if you are the head of an organization providing that service, providing that consulting service, that it would be those people. But actually in PEMANDU Associates, oftentimes those facilitators are sometimes your associates in the organization. So there's a lot of empowerment for people of different levels within the organization to lead workshops like this with presidents, with prime ministers, with CEOs, CFO, COOs, and the like. How do you train up and equip people of all levels to be able to hold these sorts of facilitative workshops well?
You can train them in a classroom, but there's no substitute for them by doing it. You have to get down into the action to do it a few times. And I think someone who has the innate ability to do this, and if he has 2 to 3 rounds of doing it, then you will see that they can do it. But there are folks that will take a long time to do it.
Do you think that there's a personality thing in play here?
Yeah. I think you have to be...
some people are not really cut out for this sort of thing?
Yeah, some people are not cut out. I mean, the geeks who are very much involved in working with a computer, very solo kind of individual work, that clearly it does not have the right temperament for doing it. You need to be a little bit more boisterous and assertive and wanting to talk to people. And that's
Good
kind of
PR skills as well, I suppose.
good PR skills, absolutely. And you must remember, particularly when it comes down to agreeing the priorities, this is when the rubber hits the road. And everybody knows that there's a limit to how much money we have as an organization to spend on initiatives. And in a country, there's limits. So when we run our model, the limits are clearly laid out for what we can afford to spend. Because if you overspend it, and then the debt level will increase. And so this is very important. So you will find there will be a lot of conflicts at the end of the workshop, towards the end of the workshop, when they come down to agreeing the priorities. Because some of them, they will drop, obviously. Because not all the ministries, in Malaysia, we have 30 ministries, and we have to decide only 6 priorities. There are many, many other ministries that they don't make the national priorities. And of course, they wouldn't like it. Particularly when you are going to say, I'm going to rob Peter to pay Paul. Meaning, I will take money from your budget and put it on another budget. And that's going to be very, very difficult.
We've talked about this strategic workshop in the context of a government and perhaps even a large organization. Now, I'd like to take us to imagining if we were to do something like this. Let's say you're a startup. A startup, you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a lot of resources either. What might this look like? Would we apply the same sort of principle and structure? The reason why is because based on how we currently run this workshop right now, you mentioned that you have those first 3 sessions before lunch, and it's good that it's before lunch because you don't want to have a talk in the, on the graveyard shift, if you like, after lunch when everyone is sleepy, having in the midst of their food coma. But 3 hours does seem like quite a long time for just talk before going into the actual, workshopping and discussion. So if you are trying to convince someone who has a startup to do this, what might it look like?
Let's put it this way. Let's imagine a startup. There are 5 people involved in it. There are 5 guys and some ladies involved.
That might be the entire organization.
That may be the entire organization. And so you get the 5 people to come together and really define for themselves where are they going with this startup, and put for themselves the game, the impossible. In a 5-year period, this is a current position of the startup. In 5 years' time, where do we envisage the organization to be in terms of its profitability, in terms of its growth, in terms of its customer base? That's the true north, once they define it. And I really encourage the 5 people in there to stretch the imagination, to put the target to be impossible to achieve based on the current way of doing it. And so once they start doing that, they then have to ask for themselves, what are the priorities that will achieve that? And so once they've agreed in that, I would say you don't need to have a very structured approach to doing it. You just have a meeting. The 5 people there, and because this is small, you don't have the CEO making a presentation to the other 4, but they will just discuss it iteratively amongst themselves. So all of them co-create the idea of the true north. They co-create and agree where the priorities are. And in this particular case, I really encourage them to do the simulation model because they will ground them. And so it's very, very important to ground them to really do this. And if you start doing that, then I think you'll go very, very far in doing it. The key priorities and the true north. And so I think you may not even need a whole day. If these guys agree by lunchtime, it's done. And a startup, I don't think you need a lot of time if those guys agree. Because the 2 things you needed were at the start of the journey. You only need to have leadership commitment and leadership alignment. That's the starting point, because the subsequent thing that you do is different.
Leadership commitment and leadership alignment. I think from a service provider standpoint, so as consultants, or in my case, when I was working in advertising agencies, that's really good for us when we're doing any form of engagement with a client, because we know that if whatever we are doing for them whatever we are partnering with them on. If we get the CEO or key leadership in that organization on board, we know that it will be easier for us in order to move things, because we know that we have a key ally in the leadership of the company. I wonder now if we are taking that sort of client's perspective, though, do you think that there might be resistance from people down the line in thinking that why were we not consulted as part of this kind of process in shaping what the vision is for the company and shaping what the goals are for this year? Why was that held purely within top management?
Group. Yeah. This is good question that you raised. That's why it's important to think about the big fast result methodology in 8 steps. Because step 1 does not include them, but step 2 will include them. And step 3 will include almost the masses. So that's why it's very important to think about doing it in bite sizes. Every step along the way, you will begin to bring people along with you. We will cover that in episode 2 and episode 3.
Yes, a good reminder. Many more episodes to come. We're breaking this up one by one, not just because we want to trick you into subscribing to us, although, maybe partly that's part of it too. So we do encourage you, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, so that you'd be able to see those new episodes when they come up. But I think more importantly, it's because there is quite a lot to cover. And, to my point just now about asking you whether or not 3 hours of talking is too much information front-loaded, I think we want to avoid overloading with information. So I think if we can break it down, your 8 steps into 1 episode per step, hopefully that will be a better way for people to take in how these steps can look like in their own context as well. So speaking of context, though, I also want to acknowledge that there are going to be a lot of people who watch this channel who are either students or they might be stay-at-home parents. And I don't think any of this, any of what we talk about on this podcast, I think we always want to make sure that it's also applicable to people in those sorts of contexts as well. So in terms of something like step 1, setting the strategic alignment, maybe let's take it from a home context. What might this look like at home?
Yeah, I think it's important for the father and the mother and the kids to come together and sit down and figure out what is it they want to do. And let's suppose they're saying that we now want to make sure that the 3 kids here in this, all of them have university degrees. They're all young. They are all in primary, one in primary school, one in secondary, 2 in secondary school. They have a discussion about they want all of them to go to university and come out there as professionals, and that's the discussion. So when they have that discussion, they have to put out there what level of true north there is. The true north is if the grades currently in school and they are all about just average student, why don't you put the target to be number 1 and number 2 in your class? So when you put that as number 1, number 2, how do you move from number 15 to become number 1 or number 2 in the class within a period of 1 year? And that's a conversation that the father and the mother have. And one is tuition. One key priority is to give tuition. So the father and the mother will have to ask how much money are they prepared to put for the tuition to make sure that those 3 kids will have the tuition that's available. That's one activity. The second one is that the father and the mother will sit together with the kids every night to make sure they do the homework. That's an activity. The third activity they needed to do is to make sure that the 3 kids, they must know who is currently number 1 and number 2 in the individual class, and make sure that they become their friends. When they become their friends, their job is to find out exactly what that person who is number 1, number 2 is doing well, and then do that, but to the power of 10. And this is what we meant in an earlier episode called Kiasu.
Episode, the very first
Kiasu.
one.
We talked about Kiasu. So in the context of this home, the 3 kids in that family will have to be Kiasu. They need to become friends with the other kids who are number 1 and number 2 in their class, know what they're doing, talk to the parents after they come back, and then design a program so that they'll do that to power of 10. And then you will watch the outcome. The first term, the second term, the third term. That is how you will get to the outcome. Because if you are number 1 and number 2, chances are you will come with probably straight A's. And if you come straight A's, you will definitely have a place in university. And in this particular case, if the kids don't have scholarship, they are poor, relatively poor, then they will have scholarships. So it's very important to think what this family is going to do from a financial standpoint, because university education is not cheap. It's very expensive. And if you cannot get to the local university, then you have to go to the public university, then you have to private. It costs even more money. And if you go overseas, even more money. So it's very important financially for the family to say, I'm going to sacrifice some money for tuition and make sure that our sons and daughters are kiasu and making sure they get the best grade so that they will earn a scholarship. When they can earn a scholarship, then plain sailing. And I do believe that when the kids, like a flywheel, when the flywheel starts turning and they begin to experience what it feels like to win. I can tell you, the first time I became number one in class, Leon, and they called me and I was on the podium receiving the prize and the parents all clap hand, the kids clap hand. I just told myself, I don't want to be number two and number three again because I like this. You know, when you feel you tasted success, it becomes part of the flywheel, and that you can't stop it, and you start flying. And so I think when you're in the context of a home, it is totally conceivable that kind of a thing can be done. The true north, the game, the impossible, the discipline of action, getting them together to go and do this. And I think it's totally doable.
If you're very clear on your true north and what that is, you will find that the doing actually becomes a natural byproduct of simply responding out of that. That's what we do, as Christians as well. This is, I'm a pastor in a church, and we talk about the importance of not going through the motions in the work that we do. It's very easy to fall into that trap. You get used to praying a certain way. If you preach, over time, we kind of talked about this before, but over time you start to develop templates, you start to develop formulas of what sorts of preaching structures work, what doesn't work. It becomes very easy to do all of that without actually returning to the why. And actually, in our case, we believe that we are empowered by the Holy Spirit. So, what we try to remind ourselves and what we try to have a habit of doing is reminding ourselves to operate out of that why, operate in that power of the Holy Spirit, so that we're not just doing the work, but we're doing the work with purpose. And I think ultimately, no matter where your context is, you don't necessarily have to do a 3-hour talk. You don't necessarily have to follow this same structure as well. But I think the key point here is that whatever your transformation pursuit is, it begins with discovering, identifying, and aligning on what the true north is. And that becomes the starting point for everything.
Absolutely. That's good, Leon. Actually, now that you mentioned that, it just reminded me about the fact that I lecture twice a year for a few years now in Harvard. And this program was started by a lady by the name of Jamie Coopers. Jamie Coopers, and together with the folks in Harvard, they came with this idea that there are so many ministers in governments today, they have not had enough training and leadership training and coaching to become good, effective leaders. So they've developed a program, and I'm one of the faculties to do that. So 2 times a year, we invite ministers of finance, ministers of economic planning, ministers of education, ministers of public health. We then bring them to Boston. We fly them, and the whole program is sponsored by Big Win Philanthropy, and Big Win Philanthropy is owned by Jamie Coopers and Bill Gates as well, the Gates Foundation, as well as Warren Buffett. And so we then fly the ministers into to Boston, and then we teach them all these things that we talked about. And you and I use the term True North. In the Harvard program, we call it the legacy goals. It's nice. Exactly the idea. The legacy goal is the question we ask them: you are a minister. When you die, what do you want people to talk about your legacy after you have left? You're no longer in the job when you have resigned, you moved on. what do you want them to talk about? That's the legacy that you leave behind. It's very much a true north idea. And so after they do that, we also talk about how do we get a leadership commitment? How do you get a leadership alignment? The step one that we talked about today. It's exactly the same thing. So we spent a whole week in Boston together with them. Half of the lecturers are Harvard professors. The other half are people like me who are practitioners, and we've been ministers before. We then do that. So it is really very, very, very good session. In fact, I think in the recent past, Kari Jamaludin, as Minister of Health, participated as one of the ministers who came there to learn about the technique and methodologies. And Lim Guan Eng also came as well. And so I remember Lim Guan Eng, and I had long discussions with him as well, long discussions with KJ and when he was there. And fantastic. And so it was really a great opportunity to do that. The step one, getting a leadership commitment alignment is absolutely critical. In the Harvard program, we say if you don't get that right, you don't get the legacy right, you don't get people to come along with you, you don't have commitment and leadership, you're bound to fail. So that's critical.
Legacy goals, actually, I like that.
Yeah, legacy goals.
That's very good. It implies a model of multiplication.
Yeah.
Very much in line with what Jesus did.
Yeah.
Very much in line with, I think, how not just churches should operate, but all organizations, because you ultimately want whatever you achieve to be scalable, and actually you want the next generation, you want your successors to not only be able to carry that on, but hopefully do an even better job than you. I think that is what it looks like actually for any healthy family, a healthy organization, a healthy church, to have this kind of legacy mindset. Another Lao Tzu quote, which is, a leader is best when people barely know that he exists. When his work is done, his aim is fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves. And I think that very much captures this essence of a legacy goal. I really like that. I think that's a good place to end today's episode. We still have a lot more to go. So today we talked about the true north. Now from here, as we say, a lot of this might seem very simplistic, but actually the key is really in the execution.
Yeah.
As we go through the rest of our episodes in this 8-part series, we're going to talk a little bit more explicitly about how that doing, what that actually looks like, how that translates into action. Can you give us a short taster of what we can expect in the next one? What is step 2?
The step 2 is following up step 1, obviously. In the step 1, we've agreed the leadership commitment on the true north, the leadership commitment alignment on the key priorities were agreed. The step 2 is how do you take those key priorities to move it forward? And we will be talking about the labs, how we bring people along with you, different departments and different organizations within the organization to come together and spend time called 6 weeks laboratory to drill down those priorities so that you get very rich ideas and innovation, how to get them to be implemented. And that's what we will be covering in step 2.
Very good. Looking forward to that. Once again, we just want to say thank you for joining us on the Game of Impossible podcast. We also want to say that today, as of today, what's the date today? Today is the 27th of April, we have hit 1,000 subscribers, and that's thanks to you. When we started this podcast, we would have been very happy to even have 1 subscriber, but to have 1,000 subscribers in just 9 weeks of doing this, it really means a lot to us. So thank you so much for supporting this channel. And for those who are not subscribed, we encourage you, please support us, please subscribe to us. You can also follow us on our social media channels, The Game of Impossible. We are on Instagram, we're on TikTok as well. So thank you once again. We look forward to bringing you many, many more episodes, and we'll get better the more support we have and the more feedback that we get from you also. Thank you so much for joining us along on this journey, and we look forward to many more episodes to come.